Hello, everyone. Welcome to Laser Focus. This is the deep dive pop culture podcast from Nerdist. My name is Kyle Anderson. Thank you so much for joining me. This episode is just going to be a me episode. Just what everyone always wants is just a Kyle episode. But just a little episode to kind of, we're halfway through the year, a little over halfway through the year. And I wanted to kind of talk about, I know we talk a lot about various comic book things and television shows and nostalgic deals, but I am also a fan of movies, as you maybe knew that. And I'm a film critic sometimes. And so I'm going to talk about my 10 favorite movies of the year so far. There, as I record this, just a little, about halfway through July. So it's a little over halfway through the year. But I think that, there was a lot of really fun stuff coming that came out in the last few months. And I think that, some of them are obviously huge blockbuster movies and some of them are not. So I think it was just kind of fun to talk about things that I enjoyed, and maybe you would enjoy them as well. If you, before I get too far into my list, if you have any questions, I want to start doing mailbag episodes, which will be these kind of short little things. But if you have any questions about anything in the pop culture sphere, my personal opinions on things, or any of our guests, past guests, who's been on the show frequently, please email us at laserfocus@nerdist.com and we will answer them. Hopefully in the next, month or two, we'll get enough to have a whole episode about it. That would be great and fun and all that stuff. So I'm going to do these. I haven't ranked anything fully yet. You can see my full list of everything I ever watch on my letterbox, which is letterbox.com /Kyle_Anderson. And I watch a lot of old movies. And so obviously those, and maybe one day I'll do, this is everything Kyle watched in a year, but that would be insane. So without further ado, we're going to go kind of alphabetical order of my favorite movies of the year, my 10 favorites. And some of these, I should also stipulate, some of these are smaller movies that are technically not from 2024 in their respective countries or their initial festival releases, but this is the year that they are getting either wider releases or when I personally have seen them because they've finally been released in this country. So, okay, here we go. So up first is, probably not surprising to many people, but Dune Part 2 by Denis Villeneuve was so good. They're big, huge, giant, sci-fi spectacles. I personally enjoyed the second one a lot more than the first one, which is not to say I didn't enjoy the first one. The first one has a lot of setup to do, and the second one felt a lot more like, all right, now here's the story of Paul Atreides, and he's kind of rise but also fall. If you haven't seen the movie yet, you should go check it out. I believe it's on Max. But I think it has some really interesting sci-fi things to say, and I really do hope that they get to make the third one. But even if they don't, which I imagine they will. Look, I have no insider information on this, but I think they probably will. I feel like this movie gave you everything you want: big, huge, giant action set pieces, but also an ending climax that is very small and intimate, and just a hand-to-hand combat scene between two hot young actors. Which I'm all about hot young actors. What a thing to say. But anyway, I don't need to talk too long about Dune Part 2. It's great. Please let me know if you like it, and what you liked about it. I know some people preferred the first part, which is fine, but I personally have thought the second part just kind of held my attention a little bit more, scene to scene. Also, we get to see cool worm writing. It's pretty cool. Next, we have another franchise bit of movie making, Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga. So I feel like this movie kind of has an interesting, or had an interesting kind of release, because there was so much press around it, and Anya Taylor-Joy and Chris Hemsworth were everywhere. So much so that they talked to me, which you can find that interview on our YouTube channel. But that's how much they were wanting people to talk about this movie is that I got to interview them. I don't do that kind of thing very often. Um, I thought this was a great movie. I thought it was. I thought it had the problem with it, if there was such a problem, is that I think how do you follow something like Mad Max Fury Road? Um, Obviously, it's a prequel to that movie, but it also needs to be the next movie. It's 10 years later, and what do you do? And I think it was tough. I think it was a tough act to follow in a lot of ways, and I think it was also sort of a testament to maybe people didn't feel the need to go out and see it because obviously there was the box office did not show up for that movie, but it's George Miller. He's still at the top of his game. I do have to say that I did not particularly enjoy 10,000 years of 2000, 10,000, however many thousands of years of longing, that movie he made about the genie played by Idris Elba and Tilda Swinton. I didn't really care for that movie, but I'm really glad he got to make that movie. But then, come back to the wasteland and kind of have a really interesting exploration of a character across many, parts of their life in the wasteland. And I think that Chris Hemsworth is so good, and I think the real travesty is going to be if he doesn't get like end of year awards consideration simply because that movie did not kind of set the world on fire the way Fury Road did. I think he's really great in that movie. Which is not to say that Anya Taylor-Joy isn't good, but Hemsworth has the more interesting role, I think. Also, if anybody is a fan, anybody who hasn't seen this movie, I believe, again, should be on streaming soon, if not there already. But if anybody has played the Mad Max video game, it's an imperfect game, but it's a game that I've played a lot of times because I just think it's fun. I went back and after I watched Furiosa, I went back and played the game, or at least a good amount of the game. And I was really shocked to see how much stuff from the game, either names or locations or, any number of things do show up in Furiosa. Just kind of hammer home that there is like a plan for all this stuff. And, at one point there is the remnants of, Dr. Dementis's, car that has a motorcycle on it. And it doesn't say his name directly, but you do kind of get the sense, oh, that's his, it's one of the great biker lords of the past and all this stuff. It's great. It's fun lore, kind of flavor text in that game. Also, Scrotus, Scabrous Scrotus is the main villain of the game. And he of course is the, one of the sons of, Immortan Joe in Furiosa. So anyway, I thought it was great. It's not as good as Mad Max Fury Road, but that's like saying, complaining that this, excellent hamburger isn't as good as this petite filet mignon. It's like they're both about the same, but you just get different things out of it. So anyway, I would recommend that movie. I will say I do not know how much that movie will stick with me the way that Mad Max Fury Road did, but it's still a great piece of action filmmaking, and sometimes that's all you need. So next up, we have a movie that I've known about for such a long time. Last year, I went to Fantasia International Film Festival in Montreal, and I was gonna see this movie because it was playing there. And then for various logistical reasons, I wasn't able to make any of the screenings before I had to fly back to LA. I met the director, hung out a little bit with him. I really wanted to see this movie, and only just, within the last couple of months actually got to see it. And that, of course, is Mike Cheslick's Hundreds of Beavers. Now, that is the name of this movie. If you've not heard of this movie, you can rent it on digital. I think it'll be streaming on other platforms fairly soon, but you can rent it anywhere you rent digital movies. It is, how to describe this movie? It is a throwback to both like Buster Keaton style silent movies and also Looney Tunes, but in live action, done on a shoestring budget, where there's a guy in the olden days who wants to become a trapper for various reasons. And he needs to kill a number of beavers in order to get enough money to, basically just do various things. And so most of the movie is him trying to get these beavers, hundreds of them, in fact. And they're all the animals in the entire movie are played by people in kind of like mascot costumes. And it's weirdly violent, but also like, it's like Three Stooges kind of violence. And it just goes and goes and goes and goes. And it's such a strange movie. But you just can't help but laugh at it. It's absurd. If you like weird old cartoons, and if you like, basically an experimental film, their earlier film, the same group of people's earlier film, Lake Michigan Monster, kind of plays in the same, it's an old timey looking movie. This one I think pulls it off a little bit better, not least because there's no spoken dialogue in Hundreds of Beavers, and there was in Lake Michigan Monster, and I think that kind of slowed it down, even though it's a shorter film. But just the amount of care that went into the effects in this movie, you can tell that it was made on a shoestring, but also like it looks so much better than that in a lot of ways, and the kind of cartoony, artificial aspect of it really, elevates it to a pretty high degree. So please go watch Hundreds of Beavers. I think it's so funny and weird. And I don't watch a lot of comedies. I have to say I do enjoy comedy, but I don't watch a lot of comedy movies. And so it needs to be something kind of special for me to even want to watch it in the first place. And this really, it lived up to the hype. I think it's been making the festival circuit for years. Mike Cheslick and the whole crew have basically been doing the rounds, because again, it showed at Fantasia Fest last July 2023, and he's basically been doing the festival rounds ever since. And I think they're about to go to London or something like that, some film festival in Europe, to hawk the movie and stuff like that. And it's just like, you know what? That's what I enjoy, as a groundswell of attention to movies. Hundreds of Beavers, please go check it out. On that same kick of weirdness, I also really liked the new Yorgos Lanthimos movie, Kinds of Kindness. Now, I think it's interesting that Lanthimos has been getting a lot of attention and awards kind of plaudits recently for stuff like last year's Poor Things, and then a few years ago The Favorite, and then before that, kind of very dark things like Killing of a Sacred Deer, and his Greek language film Dogtooth. But what I think is really funny is that after getting all this awards attention, and having Emma Stone win an Oscar for being in Poor Things, for him to go, you know what, I'm gonna make another movie with this, basically the same group of people, and make it even weirder. Kinds of Kindness is 3 different stories with the same cast playing different characters in each one. They all kind of take place in the same universe. It's very, it's very strange, but if you don't know anything about Yorgos Lanthimos, he does these kind of absurdist, dark comedies with a lot of violence in them generally, and really dark themes. And I think that there's a lot going on in all of these, and you just kind of have to buy into the strange premises of all these, because all 3 of these shorts, and I say shorts, they're all about an hour long. It's a pretty long movie. But you go through the gamut of like, I'm laughing at this movie, I'm cringing at this movie, I'm confused by this movie, and that's kind of what he does just across the board. I think special attention should go to Jesse Plemons, who has 3 of certainly the first 2 stories. He kind of is the lead of them, and is particularly upsetting in the second one, as this guy whose wife has been missing for a year or more, and he just can't get over it, and then suddenly she's back and everything should be fine, and his wife's played by Emma Stone, and he can't get over this feeling that maybe she's not really his wife and something nefarious and maybe supernatural has happened, or he's just kind of gone off the deep end. And that's what I really like about the movie, is that you can never, like, it really threads the line between, are these people just, do they just think there's something out there, or is there actually something out there? And we're never 100% sure. It's not this, his type of movies are not for everybody. I'm not going to sit here and say it is a crowd pleaser of a movie, because I'm sure there's lots of people who are just like, the hell is this movie? But if you are predisposed to liking any of Lanthimos's more mainstream movies, if you watch Poor Things and thought, I think this could get weirder, then I think you would enjoy Kinds of Kindness. If you watched that and went, this is too much for me, I do think Kinds of Kindness is probably a bridge too far. But I really like what he does, and I think the success of earlier films has only just given him license to have these huge, giant, amazing casts to do these crazy, weird movies. Speaking of crazy, weird movies, the most recent movie on my list, it took me, if you read my review on Nerdist.com, you will know that it took me a few days of thinking about the movie after I saw it to even know whether I liked it. I obviously I'm talking about it now, but I came down on the side of I really like it. And in fact, the more I think about it, I've still only seen it the one time, but the more I think about it, the more I enjoy it. And that is Longlegs, which I'm sure you've seen a million things about Longlegs. Osgood Perkins' fourth film. His best, I think. It's certainly the most polished, the most, we'll say the most like self-assured, and maybe the easiest to comprehend in a lot of ways. A lot of people were calling it a serial killer movie. I don't 100% agree with that. I think it's more a kind of a horror, like a serial killer movie with occult themes. I think it's more of an occult horror movie with serial killer kind of police procedural kind of stuff with the FBI. But it is, you want to talk about a creepy movie. There's a few times where there was like legitimate like scares in the movie, and he's really good at, it's got some really good jump scares. And I don't say that as somebody who even likes jump scares. I don't enjoy a jump scare, but when they're done well, you do kind of have to appreciate them. And that movie has a lot. And, Nicolas Cage is just so intensely creepy in the movie, and also funny because he's still weird Nicolas Cage. And so you do kind of laugh sometimes, but you're also like, ooh, like he gives you the willies. People still say that. I just think this, and like that doesn't give it, hopefully doesn't give too much away, because some of it's been in the marketing material, but like it's going to make you think about the band T-Rex in a weird way. It's a lot of glam rock stuff in the movie, kind of just in the background, and not literally in the background, but there's posters and stuff. But I think there's a few times where the movie really, gives you a gut punch, and then just gives you kind of weird uncanny valley kind of feelings but like people uncanny valley. It's not even like a robot or, just a weird face of like a cartoon or something like that. It's like legitimate uncanny valley just of the world around you. And it does an amazing job of making you think there's probably something in the frame that I'm missing. And maybe there is. I have no way of knowing. I'm almost positive most of the time there's nothing there, but that's how good the filmmaking is to make us think that there's actually something there for us to look at, even if there's not. I love, as you probably know, if you're a frequent listener to this or just a viewer of Nerdist stuff, but I'm a huge horror movie fan. I do have issues with a lot of, I'll call it A24 style horror. Some of them work for me, some of them don't. But I think the kind of over-reliance on just mood and atmosphere, if it has kind of intentionality behind it, I think it can really work. Other times I just think it's like, let's just do nothing and see what happens. I think that, but Longlegs, I think, it has the atmosphere throughout, and I think it kind of has the strength of its own convictions to kind of follow this, pretty standard serial killer kind of occult, the guys at Red Letter Media called it the best episode of Criminal Minds ever. And like, you kind of go, yeah, I can kind of see that. But if you've seen The Black Coat's Daughter, there's a lot of crossover in terms of themes there, even though they're, very, very different types of movies. I will say that like so Black Coat's Daughter is his first movie, and I think that's maybe his second best movie. The first one of his I saw was I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House, which is this very slow, very quiet ghost story. So slow and so quiet that I didn't like it at all. And I love a ghost story, but I thought that was quite boring in a lot of ways. And then the third movie is Gretel and Hansel, which is interesting. And in terms of kind of pushing the envelope in terms of like how horror-y is horror for him, that's probably the furthest. But I think Longlegs is like is the mark of, hey, this guy's made a few movies and now here's his big stamp, and hopefully he can parlay that into some other really interesting movies. So and it's Anthony Perkins' son. Like, I know that's been talked about to death, but Norman Bates' kid making horror movies is just awesome. Here's my one. I'm a huge movie nerd pick as opposed to these other ones. But I also really love classic cinema, and I'm also a huge fan of classic British cinema. And so the documentary Made in England, the films of Powell and Pressburger, by director David Hinton, was absolutely right up my alley. It is a journey through the film. If you don't know Powell and Pressburger, Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger were this filmmaking team. Powell is British. Pressburger was Hungarian, I believe, who fled during World War II or just before to England. And then the two of them started making films together under the banner title The Archers. The two of them together were The Archers. They both produced the movie. They were both credited on almost all of their movies as written and directed by Michael Powell and Emma Pressburger. Pressburger, however, did most of the writing, and Powell did most of the directing. Michael Powell, after their partnership ended, did make Peeping Tom, which, if you are a fan of kind of weird, creepy slasher movies, that was kind of a proto one that came out the same year as Psycho. So anyway, together they made some of the most beautiful, vibrant films ever, certainly British films, but just vibrant and evocative movies like The Red Shoes, like Black Narcissus, like one of my favorite movies ever, two of my favorite movies ever, The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, and A Matter of Life and Death, also called Stairway to Heaven, but it's A Matter of Life and Death. Just some fantastic films. Often, they had to make a lot of, for lack of a better term, propaganda movies during World War II, pro-war effort movies, but they really took a lot of care to make them human stories and not just wave the flag, get people on board with fighting the Nazis and all this stuff. The movie is told from the perspective of Martin Scorsese, who talks directly to camera, talks about his own personal journey, because he was a huge proponent of their films, became a good friend of Michael Powell later in Powell's life. And Powell even married Thelma Schoonmaker, who is Scorsese's editor for the past 100 million years. Toward the end of Michael Powell's life, he passed away several years ago, but it's a really great movie. If you just like movies, and if you like Scorsese talking about movies, like that, you could not do any better. And it's a great introduction to the Archers films if you've never seen one, and it's also a great kind of celebration if you're a big fan of them like I am. So I don't know how you find this one. I saw it at the TCM Classic Film Festival in April, but I think track it down if you're at all interested. It's called Made in England, and it's well worth your time. The next one on my list is, I think, a really interesting movie. It's one that I've maybe thought about the least of the ones on my list, but I do think it's a piece of work that is very impressive, and I look forward to see what this person does as a filmmaker going forward. And that is Dev Patel's Monkey Man. It's an action movie, kind of in the vein of a John Wick, but it's all hand-to-hand combat instead of guns. and it's incredibly brutal. You'd never necessarily expect from, some of his other films that Dev Patel, from Slumdog Millionaire, would grow up to make this gritty action movie with himself as the lead, where he's a a bare knuckle boxer who, through various circumstances, has to kind of get revenge on these mobbed up people in India. And I you know what, I think it's a really self-assured and solid, not in the kind of like boring way, but um example of action cinema. Again, I don't know if this movie would have been made the way it has, or even gotten made, had it not been for the kind of success of John Wick and its imitators. I wouldn't say this is an imitator of John Wick. I think that does it a disservice, but I do think that it has that vibe. If you like very super violent, one guy versus a million people kind of movies, I don't think the story is like super complex or particularly interesting, but it is nice. It's interesting to see it from the perspective of a culture that I don't know that well, and also, and utilizing kind of folklore, because the idea of this ancient Indian hero of the Monkey Man, who you know can stand up for small people everywhere. I think is fascinating, and I think it leads to some really great action set pieces, and a really kind of profound ending. But it's an action movie. If you're not into fighting, if you're not into blood, it's incredibly drippy. So there you go. That is Monkey Man. So last three. First one is Robert Morgan's Stopmotion. This movie actually came out in last year, 2023, but I only just saw it this year. This is Robert Morgan makes a lot of stop motion movies, short films on his YouTube channel, but then also does kind of effects work for other movies. And this movie is a really creepy, kind of slow descent into madness type of movie about this woman whose mother is like an award-winning stop motion filmmaker who, due to horrible crippling rheumatoid arthritis, can no longer manipulate the puppets herself, and is using her daughter, who is also a burgeoning stop motion filmmaker, literally as her hands to finish her film. And it kind of is like, she is using her daughter to manipulate these puppets. So is her daughter like a puppet herself and all this stuff? And then the daughter starts to kind of slowly fall into madness, as her relationship with her mom kind of falls apart. She has these kind of hallucinations about her own stop motion film coming to life and trying to get her and stuff like that. So it's a really gross kind of mixture between, blurring of reality and fantasy and madness and all this stuff. I believe it's on Shudder. Yeah, it is on Shudder. Check it out. It's not for everybody. It's one of those kind of slow burn kind of horror movies. It is very gruey at a certain point, and by that I mean it's full of gru. No, it's not a Despicable Me movie. And there's some like squeamish parts where, like, if you have issues with very delicate violence, if that makes any sense, like very small cuts, or like, for example, if fingernail ripping is not your kind of cup of tea, I would maybe steer clear of stop motion. But I think it's a really interesting movie. I don't know how long it'll stay in my top 10 into the later in the year. It's kind of lower on the list, but I do think it's good. Second to last on my list, we had this director on the podcast, and this should come as no surprise to anybody who knows me and knows my tastes, that Ultraman Rising, the animated film by Shannon Tyndall, which is currently on Netflix, is on my list. I think it's just fun. I think it's just an exuberant, joyful, love letter to people who like superhero stuff as kids, but also like growing up and being, becoming a parent and also having a parent at the same time, being that weird kind of middle ground of like, I'm taking care of somebody, and somebody else once took care of me, and I'm going to have to take care of them eventually too, and everything, all in the sphere of Ultraman fighting kaiju in Japan. There's a lot of fun Easter eggs in there. I think it's a it's not a one-to-one. It's not like, as Mr. Tyndall said on the podcast, he didn't just set out to make an Ultraman movie. He set out to make a movie, and then the fact that he got to use Ultraman was like perfect. So like he melded his original idea with the fact that he got to use Ultraman. So it is not 100% what most Ultraman is like, but it's also, you can watch it in English and it's animated. But it is a really good example of what I think, really works about Ultraman, which is that it is this kind of all-purpose good, in even if, or it's something to strive for, I guess, even if your mileage may vary on whether the kaiju deserve to be fought or not. And that's something they, the very first series of Ultraman back in 1966 even tackled. So Ultraman Rising on Netflix, give it a watch. And then my last one is a weird little French horror movie called The Vourdalak, directed by Adrian Beau. If you've seen the Mario Bava anthology film Black Sabbath, starring Boris Karloff, this is one of the stories in there. It's the one that's a period set film. It's based on a Tolstoy story, not that one, a different one. And it's effectively, it's about, it predates Dracula, it predates Carmilla, which is the Sheridan Le Fanu vampire story. And it is it's the vampire myth of the Eastern Europe, essentially, which is, or, kind of, I think it's supposed to be in like Estonia or someplace. But it's about a family, or a French kind of aristocrat who finds himself in the forest in Eastern Europe. He falls in with this family who is awaiting the return of the patriarch of the family, who goes off to fight the Turks who have invaded and all this stuff. And the father says before he leaves, if I'm not back in 6 days, assume I'm dead. If I come back after 6 days, don't let me in, because I won't be me anymore. I will be a Vourdalak, which is like their version of a vampire. And there's, the Bava version is very creepy and very, has a lot of stark imagery, the way that Mario Bava used to do. But this version has a particular gimmick, which is that when the father returns, just to hammer home the fact that it isn't their dad anymore, it is a 6 foot tall skeletal rod puppet. It is a fascinating thing to see. You want to talk about uncanny valley? Like, it is this rail thin puppet that is talking. It's the filmmaker himself, Adrian Beau, as the voice of the Vourdalak, trying to, and his kids being like, okay, I guess it's him. We got to let him back in. And like the French guy being like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't get this at all. So yeah, I find it, I thought it's not like the scariest movie ever, but I think that gimmick alone, and the fact that like our lead character is kind of this, pompous, literal, like fop, like he's got the white face paint and the, the fake beauty mark. And like, he just looks like a French aristocrat from back then. And like the parallel between him, the way he looks, and the outsider nature of that character in this Eastern European clan, along with this undead, blood-sucking creature, and how like, well, we have history with our dad, so he's the one we have to trust, kind of thing. Like, it's such an interesting kind of take on it. And like I said, it's not like terrifying, but if you're into kind of, folk horror and vampire legend stuff, and just kind of seeing a different take on something you've seen a million times, I would recommend it. And the Vourdalak. I'm not entirely, that's spelled Vourdalaa. Nope. Vourdalak. It's like Dalek, but with vor at the beginning. I know that's not how you spell Dalek. Yeah, so those are my 10 favorite movies of the year so far. Please tell me if you've seen these, B, did you like them, and 12, if you haven't If these are not movies you've seen, what are the movies in your top 10 so far? Obviously, we have some big, huge movies coming up. Deadpool and Wolverine's coming out very soon. I'm very much looking forward to Robert Eggers on the subject of vampires. Nosferatu remake is coming out much later in the year. There's lots of really interesting stuff, a lot of horror movies, but again, I'm a huge horror movie fan. So tell me what you're most looking forward to for the rest of the year. Please send all of your queries, all of your comments and everything to laserfocus@nerdist.com. Or you can leave a comment anywhere you leave comments. I will see them. I promise. There will be a beacon up in the sky. The Kyle signal. So that was it. Just a little quick episode this week. We've got a lot of big stuff coming up in the weeks ahead. Discussions of Deadpool and Wolverine, discussions of the new Bruce Timm animated series Batman Caped Crusader, which I've gotten to watch, which I can't say anything about yet, but we'll have a whole episode about that and so much more. And if you like Animorphs, we're going to have an episode about the Animorphs books and television show. So these are all coming up in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you all so much for listening. I really appreciate it. I've been Kyle Anderson. Join me again next week on Laser Focus when my guest will be someone who is a person. Bye-bye. Laser Focus is a production of Nerdist Industries and Legendary Digital Networks. It was produced, edited, and hosted by me, Kyle Anderson. For more, visit nerdist.com.